Humanity had always been loud in the galaxy. They had come from a small blue planet full of noise and color. They built ships that could cross the stars and spoke of dreams that others found strange. The other races of the galaxy had watched them for a long time with both curiosity and fear. They called them the Restless Ones, because humans never stopped moving. They built colonies on cold moons and hot deserts and floating cities above gas giants where no other species had dared to live. They laughed in danger and survived things that made others hide behind rules and laws for many years. The great alliance of alien worlds known as the Galactic Concord watched the humans grow and spread across the stars. Some of them believed humans would one day become a great power. Others thought they would destroy themselves before that could happen. When the first human wars began across their colonies, the Concord waited for the noise to end. Decades passed, and humanity began to fade. The loud voices on their open radio channels became quiet. The trade ships that once carried goods across space stopped arriving one by one. The stars that marked human space on the Concord's maps went dark. At first, the Concord thought it was only war. Humans fought each other often, and they always rebuilt afterwards. But this time it was different. No messages, no distress calls, no peace talks, nothing. The silence was too complete. Commander Alara Tovan of the Vithari Union had studied humans. Since her first posting, she had read their history and even learned their languages. She found them strange but interesting. She remembered reading one of their old sayings about silence being golden now, as she sat before her screen in the Concord observation hub watching the empty human systems. She wondered if they had taken that saying too far. Her team reported that entire planets had gone quiet. Cities where dark satellites were still in orbit, but no signals came from them. There was power, but no life. Some members of the Concord believed the humans had finally destroyed themselves. They said that was the natural end of a violent species. Others thought a disease or weapon had wiped them out. Only Scholar Lume, of the Sarn Dominion, argued against that. She said humans were not so easy to erase. She had studied them for 50 years. She had seen them rebuild their worlds after disasters that would have ended other species. She said they would not vanish without a reason, but no one listened to her on a lonely human outpost named New Carthage. Captain Daniel Ross stood on the bridge of the last fleet of humanity. The sky above the planet was full of quiet ships waiting for his signal. Earth was already gone. The home world had been emptied years ago. Its oceans calm, its cities quiet, its people gone but not dead. The truth was that humanity had made a choice long ago to leave everything behind. They had learned that every time they reached out to the galaxy, they were met with pity or fear. They were studied and measured and never truly understood. So they stopped talking, they stopped asking, they stopped explaining, and began to build something in secret, deep in the quiet parts of space. They called it the Exodus. Daniel Ross looked out at the stars. He remembered stories from old Earth about explorers who sailed across oceans, never knowing if they would return. He felt the same fear and excitement. Now the fleets behind him were filled with families, scientists, builders and dreamers. They had been preparing for this moment for generations. The machines that would carry them beyond known space were ready, hidden under layers of silence for years. They had tested new engines that folded the fabric of space, itself not to travel faster but to leave the galaxy behind. He walked through the ship's corridors where people moved in calm order. No panic, no shouting. They knew what they were doing. Humanity was not running away. They were simply done playing. The small game the Concord offered. They wanted a place where they could grow without being watched. Captain Ross met with his first officer, a woman named Clara Hayes, who had been born on one of the outer colonies. She asked him if he thought the Concord would try to stop them. He said they would not even notice until it was too late. He was right. Back in the Concord hub, Commander Tovan received the final reports from the human border sectors. Sensors showed no movement then, in one moment. Every trace of human technology vanished from detection. No explosions, no radiation, no sign of attack. The stars themselves seemed to swallow the human worlds. She watched the readings and felt a strange chill, like something had just ended. But she told herself it was only data. A few years later, Explorers from the conquered went to check the old human colonies. They found empty cities, clean and untouched machines still working, light still shining, gardens still growing, but no people anywhere. It was as if the humans had just stepped out for a walk and never returned. They searched for clues. They found one message carved into a monument on one colony. It said, "We left because you never listened." The words were simple and without anger, but they carried a quiet weight that none of the scientists could explain. Scholar Lumet visited one of those worlds herself. She walked through the silent streets. She saw statues of human heroes and schools filled with books left open. She found no sadness, only peace. She said the silence felt alive, like the humans had become part of the stars. She told the Concord that humanity had not died but changed. She was laughed at again. But deep down, some of them began to wonder. In the years that followed, the Concord tried to fill the space humans left. They sent colonies to their old worlds, but those colonies never lasted long. Machines failed without reason. Crops would not grow, and settlers reported strange dreams of music and voices, whispering in old Earth languages. After a while, they abandoned the effort. It was as if the humans had taken something invisible with them, something that could not be replaced. Captain Ross and his people, meanwhile, were far beyond what any alien scanner could reach. They had built the Exodus engine to fold space into itself, creating a new layer of reality beyond the known universe. From there, they could see their old galaxy as a distant light. They watched it fade and felt no hatred, only a quiet sense of freedom. Ross often stood before the main window of his ship and looked at the swirling colors of the new dimension around them. It was full of energy and potential. The engineers said they could build whole worlds here made of light and thought. Humanity had found not an escape but a beginning. As the fleet spread out into the new realm, people began to change. They no longer needed to breathe the same air or eat the same food. They started to merge with the energy fields that held this new universe together. Ross called it the Second Dawn. He sent one last message back to the galaxy. It was not meant to be heard, but he sent it anyway. It said, "We thank you for teaching us silence." The message drifted through space and was lost among the stars back in the old galaxy centuries later, when even the memory of humans had become legend. The Conquered still kept watch on the empty space where their systems had been. No one dared to settle there. They called it the Quiet Zone, and ships that passed through reported strange signals, sometimes voices, sometimes songs, sometimes just a heartbeat. The scholars argued about what it meant, but Commander Tovan, who was long retired and living on her homeworld, often looked up at the night sky and wondered if somewhere out there the humans were watching too. And so humanity left quietly, without war or noise or anger. They simply stepped away from the galaxy that never understood them and moved into a place beyond sound. In sight, the Concord kept waiting for them to return, but they never did. And no one noticed that the galaxy had become a little darker without them. 100 years passed after humanity vanished, and the Galactic Concord had slowly stopped talking about them. They had more important matters, they said, and many believed that humans were just another lost race that burned too bright and too fast. But there were still those who remembered and wondered. Commander Alara Tovan was now old and retired, but she still dreamed of the silent worlds she once watched from her station. She sometimes imagined the humans were still out there, hidden, just beyond sight. She would look at the stars from her garden and think that the quiet between them had changed. Since the humans left, it felt heavier somehow. In the conquered central world, new generations had grown up, who never saw a human. They learned about them only in history lessons, where the teacher spoke of the restless species who had disappeared after a long age of conflict. Scholar Lumet was one of the few who did not believe the official story. She had spent her life studying what was left behind. She had collected human art, music, and books that the Concord archives wanted to forget. She believed there was meaning in the silence. She believed humanity had gone somewhere, with purpose. One day she was invited to a meeting of the Concord Council. The topic was the old human sectors, where strange signals had begun to appear again. They were faint, slow, and repeating. Not like any human communication they had known. The council members were nervous. Some feared a weapon, or a ghost system left behind by the humans. Lumet listened carefully when the images appeared on the screen. They showed waves of light rising from a dead planet like the breath of a sleeping giant. The signals carried no message, just a simple rhythm, slow and calm. The Concord decided to send a small research team to investigate the source, and scholar Lume was asked to join, because she had studied human patterns for many years. She accepted at once, knowing this might be her only chance to find the truth. She joined a mixed crew on a vessel called the Celian Star, led by a young pilot named Aaron Pike, who had never met a human but was curious about them. He told her that when he was a child, he used to stare at the old human pictures in museums and wonder how such soft creatures had crossed space so easily. The journey took many weeks. They passed through sectors that were once bright with human colonies, now dark and cold. The ship's scanners detected strange energy fields around some of the abandoned planets. It was as if something invisible was protecting them when they reached the signal source. They found a world that looked alive, even though no one had lived there for a century. Forests had overgrown cities, and oceans glowed faintly with light. The signal came from deep beneath the surface, where machines still worked in silence. Aaron Pike and Lume led a team down to the surface. They found huge towers covered in vines and symbols carved in English and other human languages. Lume translated the words she read. "We kept the light for those who will come." And she felt her heart tremble. They reached the main structure where the signal came from. It was a massive dome made of metal and glass inside. They found human machines still running without decay. Screens showed streams of data looping endlessly, and in the center there was a single small console with one blinking light. When Lume touched the console, it came alive. The screens cleared and showed a single message that filled the room. It said, "If you have come to take, we are gone. If you have come to learn, listen." The lights dimmed, and then a soft voice began to play. It was a human voice, male, calm, and gentle. It said, "We left because silence was the only way to grow. We gave you our noise, our wars, our words, and you gave us your pity. So we learned to build in quiet. We did not die. We changed." And the message ended. The Concorde crew stood frozen. They could not explain how the machines were still running after so many years. Aaron Pike whispered that maybe the humans had found a way to live without being seen. Lume agreed. She said they had crossed a line of understanding that the Concorde had never reached. They recorded the message and sent it to the council, but before they left the dome, the voice returned once more, saying, "We will open the gate when you are ready." The lights then went dark, and the signal ended completely. When they returned to the conquered worlds, the message caused great debate. Some said it was a trick, others said it was hope. But the council decided to classify it and forbid public access. They feared it would inspire chaos, but Lume could not forget the calm of that voice. She began to dream of the gate mentioned in the message. She imagined a doorway between realities, something the humans had built with the Exodus engine that Captain Daniel Ross and his people had once created. Meanwhile, far beyond known space, humanity was indeed still alive. They had spread across a new realm made of light and energy. They had no need for ships anymore, but they kept them as symbols of their journey. Captain Ross, though long gone, had left a legacy of leadership and purpose. His descendants guided the human collective now, not as individuals but as a shared mind. They communicated without sound through thought and memory. They had found peace in the quiet dimension they called the luminous sea. Among them was a young human named Leo Grant, who still felt a pull toward the old galaxy. He often spent time watching the stars beyond the borders of their new realm. He told the elders that something in him still wanted to understand why they had been feared and ignored. They told him the past was gone, but he could not let it go. One day he found an ancient log written by Captain Ross himself. The log spoke of the dream to explore, not escape, and of the wish that someday they would return, not for conquest but for connection. Leo read the words and decided he would find the gate and open it in the old galaxy. The signals from the human world began again, this time stronger and wider across multiple systems. Strange lights appeared in space like ripples of blue energy. Many believed it was the beginning of a natural event. But Lume knew better. She had studied the pattern and recognized the rhythm. It was like a heartbeat. She realized it was the same as the message from the dome. Only now it was everywhere. She sent a message to the council saying the gate is opening. They ignored her warning, but she went alone with Aaron Pike back to the same world. When they arrived, they found the sky glowing with strange colors and the ground humming softly. The old dome had opened a beam of light reached into the sky, forming a ring of energy. Lume felt warmth around her like a gentle wind, and then she saw them figures made of light walking within the ring. They were human in shape, but transparent, like energy given form. She heard the same voice again saying, "We waited long enough. We will speak once more." Aaron Pike fell to his knees, unable to move. Lume stepped forward and said, "Are you the humans?" The figure replied, "We are what remains of them." And what they became, the figure, told her that humanity had not left out of hate, but out of need. They had to be alone to hear the truth of existence. They had learned how to live as part of the universe itself. They could now travel between dimensions through thought. Alone they had watched the conquered for many generations, waiting to see if it had changed. The figure said, "We can share what we learned." "If you are ready," Lume asked what they must do, and the figure said, "Listen." As she stood before the light, she realized what the humans had done. They had turned silence into creation. They had found a way to use stillness as power to move, to build, to live. The light began to fade, leaving behind a single crystal that glowed softly. The signal ended. The beam vanished, and the dome closed again when Lume picked up the crystal. She heard one last whisper inside her mind. It said, "We will return when you stop fearing silence." When she came back to the conquered, she told the council everything, but they called her story a dream. They said she had seen ghosts of an extinct race. She retired soon after, but kept the crystal hidden in her home. At night she would hold it and hear faint voices like a chorus of distant stars singing in peace. She smiled, knowing that the humans were not gone. They were only waiting for the galaxy to listen. The years passed, and the story of the human signal faded again. The conquered leaders told everyone that it was only an echo from ancient machines, and people believed them because it was easier to believe in silence than in mystery. Scholar Lume had grown older and weaker. She lived in a small home near the sea and spent her days watching the waves. She still had the glowing crystal she found on the human world, and sometimes it would shine softly when the night was clear. She knew it was not a dream, and she knew the humans had changed into something the conquered could never understand. Far away on the other side of the galaxy, a group of young explorers from the conquered began to hear new signals. They were faint but constant, coming from places that were supposed to be empty. One of them, a pilot named Nora Kane, told her crew that the rhythm felt like breathing. They decided to follow it, even though the council had forbidden travel into the old human zone. When they reached the border, their ship's sensors began to fail. The stars flickered, the engines made no sound. It was as if they had entered a different space altogether. They stopped at a ruined station floating in orbit around a quiet planet. The walls were covered in frost, but the air inside was still warm. Nora and her crew entered the station. They found corridors filled with dustless air machines, still running lights, still glowing with soft blue color. There was no sign of life, but everything worked perfectly. As if waiting for someone to return, in one chamber they found a huge window showing the planet below, and across the glass someone had written in human letters, "We are not gone, just moved." Nora read it out loud and felt her heart race. They found a data core still active and brought it to their ship to study. What they found inside changed everything. The recordings were old, more than a century old. They showed humans working together, building machines that looked like stars in miniature. The recordings had voices speaking of the Exodus engine and something called the Threshold Project. One voice kept repeating that the project would open a path to another layer of existence the scientists on Nora's ship could not understand the details, but they knew it meant the humans had built a bridge between universes. They sent the data to the Concord Council and waited for orders, but no reply came. Days passed, then weeks, and the Council still said nothing. Meanwhile, back on the Concord capital, the council members argued in secret. They feared that humanity might have created something beyond their control. If the humans had found a way to move between realities, then they might still be watching. The council decided to send a fleet to the border to make sure nothing crossed over. They called it a safety patrol, but in truth they wanted to control whatever was left behind. Nora's ship was still near the station. When the fleet arrived, the commander of the fleet told her to hand over all the data and leave the area. She refused, saying the humans deserved to be understood, not erased. The commander ignored her and ordered the destruction of the station before they could act. However, the planet below began to glow with light. The signal that Nora had followed became stronger. It was not random, it was a pattern forming words in the universal code. It said, "Do not fear the silence," and then the light reached into space, wrapping around the station and the fleet inside the light. Nora saw shapes, human figures made of energy like those Lume had seen years before. One of them looked at her and smiled. Then the voice came not through speakers, but directly into their minds. It said, "We did not leave. To hide we left, to grow. The Concord feared silence because it could not control it. But we found truth in quiet. We will not harm you." The fleet tried to fire at the light, but their weapons did nothing. The voice continued saying, "You built borders. We built bridges," and then the light faded, leaving all systems dead. The ships drifted powerless for hours until finally the engines came back online. When the fleet returned, the Concord Council tried to hide what happened, but word spread quickly. Soon everyone in the galaxy was talking about the return of humanity. Some called them ghosts. Some called them gods. Others said they had become part of the stars. The council grew afraid of losing power. They began arresting anyone who spoke about the light, including Nora and her crew. They said the explorers had caused a threat to galactic order. But before their trial could begin, every screen across the capital world turned white, and a face appeared. It was human, calm and kind. It said, "You built a galaxy of fear and control, but we offer peace. If you wish to listen, we will teach you the silence that gives life." The image vanished, and for the first time in centuries, the conquered world went completely quiet. No machines, no voices, no movement. People stood still in the streets looking at the sky. Some said they heard music. Others said they heard nothing but peace. After an hour, everything returned to normal, and the message began to replay across the outer colonies. "We offer peace if you wish to listen." Far beyond the reach of the Concord, the human collective gathered in their luminous realm. They spoke through thought and energy, sharing the moment of contact. They had waited long for this. The oldest among them, who still carried memories of Captain Daniel Ross, said it was time to show what humanity had learned. He spoke to the collective, saying, "We were born in noise and found truth in silence. Now we must teach balance." His name was Ethan Ross, a descendant of the captain, and a leader among the luminous kind. He believed the Conquered could change if given a chance. Others feared the Conquered would only seek control again. But Ethan said, "Understanding begins with trust." He sent a message through the fabric of reality. Using the same crystal energy that Lume once carried, he shaped it into words that every species could understand. It said, "We left because we wanted peace. We return because we found it. We do not demand, we invite." It was received across thousands of worlds, and while many ignored it, some listened. Some began to meditate on silence as the humans had done. Small groups formed that followed the teaching of quiet balance. They called themselves listeners, and they began to change. Scholar Lume, who was now near the end of her life, heard of the event. She smiled, knowing the humans had kept their promise. She placed the crystal beside her bed and whispered, "Thank you." She died that night peacefully, and when her home was searched later, the crystal was gone. Only a faint mark of light remained on the table where it had rested. On the edge of known space, Nora Kane escaped from Conquered prison, with help from those who believed her. She stole a small ship and went back to the border worlds. She said she wanted to find the humans again. She followed the light signals that still appeared from time to time, and one day her ship vanished from scanners. Her last message said, "I hear them calling." The Conquered began to lose its hold as more people turned away from fear and control, seeking the quiet strength the humans had shown. New leaders rose who spoke of unity through understanding, not dominance. One of them, a young diplomat named Adrian Cole, said that the humans were not gods, but teachers, that silence was not emptiness but space for growth under his guidance. The Conquered changed slowly, letting go of old pride. In the luminous sea, Ethan Ross watched the old galaxy through currents of light. He saw small signals of change, and he smiled. He told his people that they had done enough, that the seeds of understanding were planted. Soon they would no longer need to watch. But before they left, he decided to send one last gift. He sent beams of energy that repaired dying stars, healed damaged worlds, and brought balance to broken systems across the conquered space. The people called it the Second Dawn, and so the humans who had once been feared and ignored became the silent guardians of the galaxy. They did not return with war or pride. They returned with calm and light. They showed that strength could live in quiet, that peace could be born from stillness. And when the Concord finally looked at the stars again, they saw that the darkness between them was not empty. It was full of human light. The Conquered had changed in ways no one had believed possible. The old council that ruled through fear was gone, replaced by a new assembly that valued balance and quiet strength. Adrian Cole had become one of the leading voices in this new order. He was young for a diplomat, but wise beyond his years. His belief in the message of the humans had inspired millions. He often spoke to the people, saying that silence was not weakness, but understanding under his guidance. Trade wars stopped and border conflicts ended. People began to build again, not for power but for peace. Still, not everyone was ready to accept the change. Some of the old military leaders who had lost their power in the shift formed a hidden group. They believed the humans were a threat to control. They feared that the silent watchers beyond the stars would one day return to rule over them. They called themselves the Keepers, and their goal was to find the source of the human light and destroy it before it could grow. Stronger, they began working in secret, building ships with dark engines that could hide from sensors, and preparing to cross the border of known space. Adrian Cole did not know of their plan. He spent his days traveling between worlds, teaching about the balance of noise and quiet. He told people that humanity had shown the galaxy what it meant to listen, and many began to follow his path. Even children learned in schools that silence was part of knowledge. He often visited the sea where scholar Lumi had lived and left flowers for her memory, for he believed she was the first to truly understand what the humans had done. He never saw the small shadow that followed him from planet to planet, gathering his words and sending them to the Keepers far beyond the edge of the galaxy. The humans who now lived in the luminous sea watched as the Conquered shifted. They spoke without sound through the web of light that connected their minds. Ethan Ross looked across the glowing currents and said, "The galaxy is beginning to listen. Perhaps it is time to speak once more," but others among them were cautious. They remembered the wars and fears of the past and said that the old hearts of pride still beat in the dark. The Council of Light debated for many cycles before agreeing that they would send a single envoy to the old galaxy, not to rule, but to walk among them as one of their own. A young woman named Mara Lane was chosen. She was born from the luminous kind, but shaped into a form that could exist in the old reality. She would appear human but carry the glow of the sea within her. She stepped through the veil between universes and arrived in a quiet system near the conquered border. Her ship was made of pure light, yet looked simple. From outside, she sent a single message to the conquered. It said, "I come to listen, not to lead." Adrian Cole received the message and felt both joy and fear. He knew what it meant. The humans had returned in truth. The Concord prepared a meeting in the open plain of the world called Serenity. It was a neutral place covered in golden grass under a calm sky. Adrian stood waiting with his aides as the ship of light descended. It made no sound as it landed. Mara Lane stepped out. She looked like any woman, but her eyes glowed softly with a light that seemed endless. She smiled gently and said, "Thank you for hearing us." Adrian bowed slightly and said, "Thank you for returning." He noticed that the air around her felt alive like a warm breeze. She told him that she had come to understand if the conquered had truly changed or if fear still ruled their hearts. Their first conversation lasted many hours. They spoke of peace and of silence, of the lessons humanity had learned in their long exile. Mara said that in the sea they had discovered that every sound created an echo that shaped reality. She said silence was not emptiness, but the moment when creation listened to itself. Adrian listened closely and said that the galaxy was ready to learn that truth. But even as they spoke, ships from the Keepers were moving through the border, their dark engines hiding them from detection. The Keepers believed that Mara's arrival was the beginning of conquest. They said the humans would take control of The stars again, they launched their weapons toward Serenity without warning. The first strike hit the surface far from the meeting, but the ground shook. Mara closed her eyes and raised her hand. A field of light spread across the land, stopping the fire before it reached the city. The air shimmered as if time had paused. Adrian watched in awe as she absorbed the energy and turned it into calm wind. She looked at him and said, "They still fear what they do not know." The Concord Council ordered all ships to defend Serenity, but Mara told them to stop. She said violence would only wake the darkness again. She reached out through her mind across space into the hearts of the keepers. Their ships began to slow, the engines dimmed, and one by one they stopped firing. She sent them images of peace and memory of the old human worlds filled with laughter and learning. She showed them Earth as it once was, blue and full of hope. Then she spoke gently, saying, "We left to find silence, so you could find it too." The keepers felt her words, and many began to weep inside their ships. They dropped their weapons and powered down. When the light faded, the sky was clear again. Mara turned to Adrian and said, "They are only lost. They are not evil." Adrian nodded and said fear made them blind, and Mara smiled softly, saying fear always does. After that day, the name of humanity became sacred across the Concord, no longer a memory but a guide. The keepers were forgiven, and their ships turned into vessels of peace. They carried supplies to rebuild the damaged lands on Serenity. Mara lived among the Concord for many years, teaching them how to listen to the universe. She became a symbol of balance, not a ruler, but a friend during those years. Mara often spoke with Ethan Ross across the bridge of light that linked their realms. She told him that the Concord was learning slowly, that they had begun to hear the silent harmony between stars. Ethan told her that one day the light and the noise would become one, and when that happened, there would be no more borders between realities. Mara listened and agreed. She said that the humans had once been children of chaos, but now they were parents of peace. And she smiled, knowing her people had found purpose. But peace never came without test. One night, the stars above Serenity began to flicker. Strange ripples spread across space like waves. Something was coming from beyond, even the luminous sea. Something unknown and powerful. Mara sensed. At first she told Adrian that another force was awakening, a shadow that had once fed on fear, now moving again. She said it was older than the humans, older than the Concord, and that it lived in the spaces where silence was broken. It had followed the echoes of their light for centuries, waiting for a path. The Concord Council called an emergency meeting. Mara stood before them and said that the only way to face the shadow was to hold silence, not with weapons, but with unity. She said if the galaxy could stay calm and trust the light, the darkness would have no place to grow. Some council members wanted to fight, but Adrian told them that war would only feed it. He remembered the words of Mara, that silence was creation, listening to itself, and he knew that to shout in fear would invite ruin. The shadow arrived at the edge of the galaxy as a storm of dark energy. It swallowed stars and left nothing behind. The Concord fleets tried to stop it, but their weapons vanished in the void. Mara gathered the people on Serenity and told them to be still. She raised her hands and began to hum softly. The sound was not loud but pure, and across the galaxy, billions joined her in quiet song, a song without words, made only of breath and thought. The darkness slowed, then stopped as if confused by the calm. The light from the luminous sea reached out, joining the song, until the storm turned into dust and vanished. When the last ripple faded, Mara opened her eyes and smiled. She said the silence won again. Adrian looked at her and said, "You saved us." She answered, "No. We saved ourselves because we listened in that moment." The galaxy understood what the humans had tried to teach all along. That silence was not an absence of life, but its deepest voice. After the storm, the stars shone brighter than before. New worlds were born from the light, and the Concord declared a day of quiet each year when no one spoke or used machines, only watched the stars in peace. Mara returned to the sea, leaving behind her name carved in stone on Serenity. It said she came to listen, and she left us hearing. And in the luminous sea, the humans watched, knowing their journey was almost complete. Centuries had passed since the great silence that saved the galaxy, and the Concord had grown into something new. There were no more empires or rulers, only circles of listeners who guided their people through peace and knowledge. Every world had its own way of honoring the memory of humanity. Some built gardens of light that shone at night. Some sang soft songs that had no words. Others simply watched the stars in silence, remembering the story of the ones who had left quietly. Adrian Cole was gone long ago, but his name was still spoken as one of the first to walk the path of balance. Children learned that he had been the friend of the one called Mara, and that together they had taught the galaxy how to listen on the world of serenity. Where Mara once stood, a new generation had taken her lessons to heart. A young historian named Daniel Lee spent his days studying the records left behind by the old conquered. He read about the days before the silence when fear and pride had ruled, and he often wondered how close the galaxy had come to ending itself. He had never seen war or hatred, only peace and gentle voices. Yet something in him wanted to understand the truth of what had happened. He often visited the stone where Mara's words were carved and sat there for hours listening to the wind. He felt that the wind carried the echoes of her song, and that somewhere beyond the stars she could still hear them. One night while Daniel was walking near the old meeting plains, he saw a light in the sky. It was not a star or a ship. It was softer and brighter, moving slowly across the horizon. He felt drawn to it and followed it to the edge of a quiet valley. There he found a figure standing in the glow. It was a woman. She looked human, but her eyes shone with the same calm light that the stories spoke of. She smiled at him and said, "You are Daniel Lee?" He nodded, too surprised to speak. She said, "Do not be afraid, I have come from the sea." Daniel realized at once who she was. She was one of the luminous kind. One of the humans. The woman said her name was Alina. She told him that she had come because the sea had felt a change in the silence. She said that something deep in the fabric of space was stirring again. Not darkness, like before, but something forgotten that needed to be found. She said that the humans had decided it was time to open the path between their realm and the old galaxy, so that both could walk together again. She asked Daniel to help her speak with the Council of Listeners because she could not do it alone. Daniel agreed, though he did not fully understand what she meant. The next day they traveled to the capital where the council met. The hall was simple, built of stone and light. No thrones or banners, only open space where voices could meet. The council welcomed Alina with respect, though some were uneasy, for no human had crossed from the sea in many generations. Alina spoke softly, telling them that the sea had grown vast and full of life, that humanity had become a harmony of light and thought, but that they still cared for the old galaxy. She said that silence was strong, but it could not stay alone forever. She said that balance meant connection, and it was time for the two sides to share their voices again. The council listened in silence, as was their custom. When she finished, the oldest listener, named Terran, spoke. He said, "We honor your people, and we remember what they gave us. But we are afraid that if we open the path again, we may lose what we have built." "Fear may return," Alina answered gently, saying, "Fear only returns when hearts forget to listen." She said the path would not bring control or war, only understanding. Daniel saw that her words touched many of them. He added his own, saying that he had studied the old records and learned that every great change came from courage, not comfort, and that the galaxy was strong enough now to face the unknown. The council agreed to think on it. That night Daniel could not sleep. He walked outside and found Alina looking at the stars. He asked her what the sea was like. She told him it was endless, like a dream made of memory. She said that every thought and every whisper from the old galaxy still lived there, that the humans had become part of the light itself, but they missed the sound of the living worlds. She said that they wanted to listen to laughter again, to see skies filled with motion. Daniel smiled and said, "We have missed you too." She looked at him and said, "Then maybe it is time we stop missing and start meeting." The next morning the council gave their answer. They said that the path would be opened, but it must be done through peace, not technology or power. They asked Alina to guide them. She led Daniel and the council to the plains of serenity. Where Mara once sang, they stood in a circle and held hands. Alina closed her eyes and began to hum softly, the same sound that Mara had used to calm the storm. The air began to glow, and The ground shone with lines of light rising upward into the sky. A rift formed like a river made of stars, and beyond it they saw the sea. For the first time, it was beautiful and vast, filled with gentle waves of color and shapes that moved like living dreams. From the sea came voices, thousands of them soft and kind. Speaking without words, the people of the conquered fell to their knees in awe. Alina said, "They are greeting you. They remember you." Daniel stepped forward and felt the warmth of the light on his skin. It was like being touched by memory. He heard laughter and whispers of ancient earth, names of oceans, forests, and cities long gone. He saw visions of the first ships leaving their home so long ago, and he understood why they had gone and why they had waited. The light of the sea reached across the rift and touched the hearts of all who stood there. It did not take them away. It joined with them like water, meeting water for the first time in forever. The humans and the Concord became one harmony. The stars around them began to sing in soft tones, the sound of a living universe. Alina looked at Daniel and said, "It is done." He asked, "What will happen now?" And she said, "Now we listen together." Time moved differently after that. The conquered and the sea shared their knowledge, and their silence worlds that had once been separate began to dream together. People learned to speak through thought and heart, not through machines. Cities became quiet places filled with gentle light and gardens that hummed softly with life. Children were born who could see both worlds at once, part light and part matter. They were called the new listeners. They carried the gift of humanity and the wisdom of the Concord, and they promised to never let fear rule again. Daniel lived to see many years of peace. He became one of the teachers who told the story of how silence saved the stars. He always remembered Alina, who one day returned to the sea saying she would watch from beyond. He would visit the plains where the path still shimmered faintly at night and tell the children how it began. He told them that the humans had left quietly, not to abandon them, but to teach them to hear. He said they realized too late that silence was not loss, it was love, and through it they found everything again. In time, the old words faded and became song. People no longer spoke of humans and Concord as separate names. They simply called themselves the listeners. They built monuments of stone and light where once there had been cities, and every year on the day of the great silence, the galaxy paused. No voice spoke. No ship moved, only the heartbeat of a living universe echoed through the stars. And in that vast stillness, the memory of humanity lived forever. They watched the stars and they listened, knowing that somewhere beyond the light the old voices were still there, whispering softly, "We are home."